Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I'm confident enough to admit that I had never heard of this Marvel comic before, so going into the theater to watch, I had approximately zero expectations for what would be in store. And honestly, I had a pretty good time watching Shang Chi. Part of that is admittedly because it was my first time being in a movie theater in about 18 months, and the other part was that it was just a plain, entertaining film, and many of you can probably agree with that. But entertaining as it may have been, there were definitely aspects that I felt could have been improved. And that is not a Shang-Chi specific thing, no film is perfect. So what I thought might be cool is a walk through a complete developmental edit of the film, enhancing the narrative strengths and shoring up some of those weak spots. For those of you who are new to the channel, I've been an editor for scripts and novels for almost a decade, and the reason this channel exists is to be a helpful guide for those who are on their own journey of writing. Editing can sometimes appear as this complicated, daunting, unknowable task, and I am not going to lie, it can be difficult. But it's also that spot in the creative process where you polish that diamond of a story you have to make it really shine. My hope is that by seeing the full process of how I edit and rewrite Shang-Chi, you might become a bit more comfortable with the process yourself. Or you could just be here to see this movie improve, that works too. A couple of things that I want to get into are some basics first. To start, I realize that some of you don't believe that Shang-Chi needs to be edited. It's fine how it is. And that's perfectly respectable. The nature of edits is that some people are not going to like the proposed changes, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm simply making changes in the best way that I see fit to improve the narrative. Others may have better ideas than I do, or think that the film is beyond saving. Whatever your inclination, all that matters is that you don't let a fear of negative feedback keep you from editing a work to become a more well-realized product. The other basic that I want to address is that I approach editing from a minimalist perspective. This means that I want to change as little as possible in the narrative, but also strive to achieve the greatest effect. My firm belief is that the more I change a client's manuscript, the less it becomes their story. I am not a writer for the story. It's not my job to create whole new elements. My job is to take what exists in the story, enhance the strengths, minimize the weaknesses, and keep it as true and honest as I can to its original form. That is going to be the overriding theme of this video actually, how minor changes can have a massive impact when you know where to place them. The last thing that I will say is that I apologize in advance for the lack of footage available for this video. Marvel is being pretty stingy with it, so it might be best to think of this as a video where you can sit back, relax, and listen. So, without any more introductory blabbering from me, let's get into it. To start this off, let's recount how the source film opened. It began with the story of Wenwu using the 10 legendary rings of power across history, narrated by his eventual wife, Leiko. The source film has Leiko telling these events of conquest and exploration to a young Shan, still a child in her arms. And from a narrative perspective, this opening lifts a lot of weight. First off, it provides an early scene of action to hook the audience right away. Secondly, it sets up the general premise for the film. Now, even though narration isn't the most elegant way to provide information to the audience, we are going to stick with it for now, but change some things for the edit. Instead of the mother, Leiko, telling the story of Wenwu to a young Shan, the opening narration of Wenwu's conquest will come from Shan himself. Shan will speak of a mighty conqueror who used the 10 rings of power to conquer all of China and beyond, eventually searching for the mystical realm of Ta Lo to uncover its powerful secrets as well. Shan will be knee-deep in his storytelling, recounting the journey of Wenwu, when he is interrupted by a call of his name and is snapped back to reality. We as the audience would now see a young woman standing in a bedroom doorway with her arms crossed, staring at Shan as he attempts and fails to help a teenage boy with his homework. Shan looks to the woman in the doorway, his longtime friend, Katie, and apologizes for getting sidetracked, saying that he gets caught up when talking about the old legends. The boy next to Sean, Katie's little brother, says that he doesn't mind. Anything is better than biology homework. Sean looks at his watch and is shocked to find it's actually almost midnight. He stands up from his seat and says that he really should get going back home if he wants any hope of being able to make it to work tomorrow. Katie tells him that would probably be best because if she had to work a shift alone, she would just quit on the spot. Katie and her brother thank Sean for his time and say that they will see him later. Sean then leaves the apartment building and is ever so fortunate enough to make it to one of the last bus lines of the night. As he gets on the bus and pays his fares, Sean notices from the side of his eye what looks to be a man staring at him from the middle of the bus. Obviously, this is a bit weird, but as Sean makes his way towards the back of the bus, he notices the man has quickly averted his gaze. When Sean passes the man and says hi, the guy doesn't respond at all, only flicking his eyes to Sean before looking back to his phone. Aside from that brief moment of interaction, though, nothing else of note happens on the bus ride, and Sean is dropped off at a stop just outside his apartment. But as Sean fiddles with the keys to open up the front door, he again sees the man from the bus in his periphery, though this time he is standing on the sidewalk, still staring at Sean. When Sean whips his head around to confront the man, he's gone, as if he vanished. Sean shakes it off, goes back to opening the front door, enters the building, makes his way to his apartment, and readies for bed. However, as Sean falls asleep, both he and the audience start hearing the faint sound of wings flapping. As the sound grows louder and more distinct, it becomes accompanied by shrieking, as if coming from some swarm of terrible creatures. Sean grimaces and shivers in his bed with his eyes closed, clearly experiencing a horrifying nightmare. But finally, over the sounds of the flapping and shrieking comes the voice of a woman, calling Sean's name over and over again at an ever-increasing tone. The last thing the woman's voice says to Sean is, "Save me," jolting him from sleeping and forcing him to confusedly yell, "Mom." Sean looks around his apartment, but all he finds is daylight and his 6 a.m. alarm going off. Sean rolls his eyes, having not gotten much restful sleep at all, and prepares to meet the day. So, we are actually going to pause for a second. This is the new introduction for the film, and while many things are similar, many things have also changed. My main goal for this edited introduction was for it to organically foreshadow all of the major aspects of the upcoming plot. However, like all good foreshadowing, it needed to be subtle enough not to give away the alluring mysteries of the narrative. Based upon the guy on the bus and weird nightmare Sean had, an audience would be inclined to recognize something is definitely brewing, but they won't know what, and it's that tension that will keep them engaged. Lastly, early foreshadowing makes a narrative feel really consistent and planned out. Proper foreshadowing is how you prevent deus ex machinas, plot conveniences, or storylines that feel tacked on. When we finish Act 2, you will get to see specifically how these small changes to the introduction paved the way for large elements later. Anyway, let's get back to it. Sean pops out of bed, does his morning workout and routine, and we largely follow the source film from here. Sean will meet Katie at work being a valet. They will go on a joyride in the rich man's fancy car, have dinner with their accusatory friend who questions their adulthood, and then hit up a karaoke bar to close out the night. The next morning, Sean will head over to Katie's apartment so they can both travel to work together. Inside, the same conversation from the source film will occur, where the family inquires when Sean will marry Katie. Of course, Sean will say that they are just friends. The only edited addition to this scene will be that Katie's grandmother will comment on how tired Sean looks, in that forward, upfront way that only grandparents can get away with. Sean will say that he's fine. He's just been having this recurring nightmare for the past few years that makes some nights a little bit harder than others. Grandma, immediately concerned at hearing this, asks Sean what the nightmares are about. Sean contemplates for a moment, but Katie rushes them out the door so they can catch the bus to work. Once on the bus, we again closely follow the source film with a fight scene. However, there are a few significant changes. First, instead of wanting to steal an amulet, the men simply want to begin fighting Sean. Katie thinks that Sean is helpless, but of course, it's revealed he's actually a master of martial arts. The other riders on the bus are astonished, and one guy even starts streaming the fight live on the internet. Sean defeats his assailants rather handily, but then finds a huge man with a sword for an arm standing as his last foe. Sean defends himself as best he can, but the sword is cutting through metal like butter and is becoming too much of a problem. The huge man raises up his blade once more, and just when it seems he will slice through Sean's arm, the sword catches and stops on Sean's wrist. With a shout and a thrust of his arm, Sean flings the huge man away, revealing a glowing orange metallic ring on his wrist. Of course, we of the audience would recognize this as one of the 10 legendary rings from Sean's earlier story of Wenwu. The huge guy with the sword and many of his partners get to their feet, looking ready for round 2. However, they don't really stand much of a chance, as Sean is able to swing his ring through the air, block attacks with it, and enhance his already impressive strength while wearing it. Sean beats the assailants, and Katie saves the bus from flying into the water, just like in the source film. Where we diverge a bit, though, is that the police will arrive on the scene and take Sean, Katie, and the rest of the bus riders to the police station. The police will question Sean and Katie as to where the random violent men came from, but they don't have anything to tell them. Hours later, after night has fallen, Sean and Katie will finally be released. As soon as their feet hit the sidewalk, Katie demands answers from Sean as to what the heck just happened. Sean looks around, keeping a vigilant eye, and says that he will talk once they get back to his apartment. Out in the open, he doesn't know who is watching or listening. Once safely inside the apartment, Katie again asks for an explanation. Sean says that as crazy as it may seem, those men on the bus were assassins sent by his father. Sean continues on saying that if they're coming after him, they must be coming after his sister as well. Katie is stunned as, one, she didn't know Sean even had a sister, and more importantly, two, she didn't know Sean's father wanted him murdered. Sean says that he hasn't spoken to his sister in years and honestly doesn't even know where she is right now, but he has to find her to make sure she's safe. Sean then starts moving around his apartment, packing up clothes and grabbing items for a trip. Katie remarks that Sean still hasn't really explained anything about what has happened today, especially the kung fu and the glowing ring. Sean says that he doesn't have time to give a TED talk on his life right now, and he will explain everything once he comes back. Katie is dumbfounded and tells Sean that if he thinks he's going alone, he's sorely mistaken. Sean snaps back at Katie and says that he can't take her because he doesn't even know where he's going. Katie then notices an envelope on the floor near Sean's front door, emblazoned with a red dragon insignia on it. She opens it up and tells Sean that he may not know where his sister is, but this might be a clue. Inside the envelope is a postcard with a Chinese address, along with 2 plane tickets, one each for Sean and Katie. They both realize that whoever sent this wants them both to come, and there probably isn't much choice in it anymore. On the plane, the edit will again closely mirror the source film, with Sean telling Katie about his past. He will reveal that he is the son of the conqueror Wenwu and the female warrior of Talo, Leiko. However, there will still be some slight changes for the edit. Sean will reveal that his father did indeed train him from a young age to be a killer. Sean also tells that he was meant to take control of the Ten Rings organization and succeed his father. Hearing this, Katie is confused. If Sean is supposed to take over for his father, why is he sending assassins to kill him? Sean reveals painfully that about a decade ago, he betrayed his father and went into hiding. When Katie asks how specifically did Sean betray Wenwu, Sean will pause as he contemplates. He'll then look down to his arm and pull back his sleeve, revealing the ring of power, and tell Katie that he stole it from his father and ran away. Sean finishes by saying that he is ashamed of what he did, and it seems his father has finally found him and is trying to kill him. Upon hearing this, Katie tells Sean that she doesn't know anything about his father, but running away from a family in charge of a secret organization of hitmen doesn't sound like a bad thing. Sean will respond by saying it's a bit more complicated than that, prompting Katie to then say that she hopes where they're going in China has some answers to simplify things then. After a moment of silence, Katie asks Sean, since he went into hiding, did he change his name too? Sean will reveal that his name is actually Shang Chi, and Katie will absolutely roast him for it. When the two get to China, the events will mirror the source film again. They will arrive to a fighting club, and Sean will learn that his fight on the bus had went viral online. Sean will enter into the fighting ring and be surprised to find his sister, Xia Ling, across from him. Upon seeing her, Sean will beg for forgiveness and say that he should not have left her all those years ago. Xia Ling will look at Sean with disgust, remarking that his apologies will not make anything right. Only fighting will. Hearing this, Sean will ponder out loud that Xia Ling never learned how to fight. And he will be very wrong. With the crowd chanting all around her, Xia Ling launches punches and swings kicks at Sean. He initially only defends, not wanting to hurt his sister, but the moments build as he takes a beating. Finally, Sean sends his own punches and kicks, but try as he might, he can't land a blow on his sister. He realizes that she is quicker, stronger, and more precise than he is. She's just plain better. As a last resort, Sean activates his ring of power and gains the upper hand against Xia Ling. The crowd is now chanting "Busboy," cheering Sean on, their allegiance shifting like a tide. But just as it looks like Sean is bound to win, Xia Ling reveals her own ring of power, shocking Sean yet again. She counters Sean move for move, both their rings dancing through the air, bouncing off each other, clanging with sparks and flashes as the siblings strike and bash one another. But just like before, Xia Ling is simply more adept, and she overwhelms Sean's defenses, eventually hitting him with a knockout blow. Shortly after, we see Sean, Katie, and Xia Ling in a back room of the fight club, just like in the source film. Sean, tending to his bruises, proclaims he deserved the beating he got, but asks his sister how she ended up fighting as a contestant here. Xia Ling responds that she's not a contestant, she owns the place. She explains that after Sean abandoned the family, Xia Ling studied martial arts in secret. Their father would never teach her, so she had to learn on her own. But it wasn't just martial arts that she watched from the shadows. She also listened in on how her father ran the Ten Rings organization, what tactics he used, and what strategies he employed to manage such an operation. Xia Ling will say that she tried to convince her father to name her as the heir to the Ten Rings, since Sean turned his back on the family, but Wenwu refused. Xia Ling will say that since her father would not give her an opportunity to demonstrate that she was just as worthy as Sean, she would have to prove it herself on her own. Finally, Xia Ling says that she stole one of her father's rings of power, just like Sean did, and ran away. She then started this fight club where both men and women could prove their strength, growing it to have talent scouts and watchmen all over the world, like a miniature version of her father's organization. Upon hearing this, Katie realizes that is how the postcard and tickets must have gotten to Sean's apartment so quick. Xia Ling will turn to Katie and say she is correct. Xia Ling has a dozen scouts in San Francisco, and once Sean's video was online, it was easy enough to find where he lived, purchase the tickets, and have a scout drop them off. Xia Ling will tell Sean that she had been waiting years for her chance to prove that she was the proper choice for heir, and it finally came. Xia Ling will also admit that she included 2 tickets because she assumed from the bus video that Katie was Sean's wife, and she might have wanted to embarrass him in front of her. But suddenly, in the midst of the conversation, an explosion rocks the fight club, sending it into chaos, just like in the source film. The Ten Rings assassins quickly flood in, but Xia Ling escapes, leaving Sean and Katie on their own. They flee onto the side of the building and have the epic acrobatic fight scene from the source film. Xialing will also appear to save Katie as she falls, just like in the source film. A minor editing difference comes when the masked ring member appears. Instead of Sean fighting him one-on-one, Sean and Xialing will fight him together. Except it doesn't go well at all, because even though each of the siblings have a ring, they bump into each other, get in each other's way, and are completely discordant in the fight. The masked ring member capitalizes on the siblings' mistakes, landing devastating strikes on both Sean and Xialing. Just when it looks like the masked ring member is about to deliver 2 finishing swipes with his daggers, the sound of a single loud clap stops him. The next noise that hits the air is Katie calling for Sean, pleading for help. She walks in captured by the Ten Rings assassins, along with Wenwu himself, who makes his first appearance on the scene. The instant Sean and Xialing see their father, they dip into a kneel. Wenwu smiles, extends his arms, and the rings of power that the siblings wield fly through the air to snap back onto his arms. Wenwu then walks over to the siblings and tells them to stand. Katie, confined and powerless, screams for Wenwu to stop, but it doesn't help. It seems like this is the end. The siblings rise, ready for their father to finish both of them, but instead, Wenwu wraps his arms around them with a hug. Sean himself is too dumbfounded to give a hug back and can only find the mental fortitude to ask, "Are you not going to kill us?" Wenwu responds that he did not come here to kill his children, but to bring them back home. He says that he has very much to tell them. Sean and Xialing look to each other, but they know there isn't much they can do now. So just like in the source film, the group travels by helicopter to the Ten Rings compound. So here is the end of the first act, which I feel is a good place to pause and go over what changes have been made. Even though 95% of the core plot is untouched, it's that 5% that really makes a difference. First and foremost, Sean and Xialing have rings. I chose to make this change for a few reasons. First, and this might be super simple, the rings are just cool. While I enjoyed the hand-to-hand martial arts combat that took place in the first act of the source film, I also thought it'd be really cool and eye-catching to show Sean and Xialing in combat with the rings. But beyond that, the early introduction of the rings serve a narrative purpose. By showing how powerful Sean and Xialing are each with a single ring, it builds up the anticipation in the audience for seeing all 10 rings together, which will come in the finale. There are a few more narrative elements that the rings serve too, but we'll get into that a bit later. The edit of the first act also clarifies the situation about the postcard. In the source film, I believe it is never directly stated who sent it or why Katie was along, but it's hinted that Wenwu set the whole thing up. In this edit of the first act, it's definitive that Xialing sent the postcard for the purpose of fighting Sean. The last edit that I will comment on is probably the most significant. In this new first act, I wanted to set the groundwork for a much more in-depth focus on the interpersonal family drama between Sean and his sister and father. The first change was having Sean actually being ashamed of leaving his family, something that will be expanded upon much more in the second and third act. Another change is really capitalizing on this sibling rivalry that Xialing lives her life by. The source film gently touched upon it when delivering her backstory, but never truly gave it any room to breathe. In this edit, I thought it would be wise to put Xialing's jealousy and competitiveness with Sean at the center of her character and journey. This too will be much more expanded upon in the second and third act. And speaking of, we can get right into the second act, which contains the most changes by far. But still, I believe it remains true to the source film and the emotions it wants to convey. So, let's jump right into it. Sean, Katie, and Xialing are all on the helicopter with Wenwu, and will touch down at his compound come nightfall. Just after leaving the helicopter and walking up the stairs of the compound, a nervous Katie is approached by a curious little furball with 4 legs and chicken wings. Initially, Katie will be terrified, because, it's pretty weird, but Wenwu will assure her that it is a harmless spirit. Wenwu says that he lets it wander around the compound and it usually keeps to itself, but for some reason it must have taken a liking to Katie. The spirit flutters its way into Katie's arms, prompting her to say that she didn't expect it to talk. Sean remarks that the spirit definitely didn't talk. However, Katie is convinced that she just heard it speak to her. Wenwu then chimes in that spirits can communicate with specific people if they so choose. Only Katie can hear it. Katie smiles and says that she must be pretty special then, naming the spirit Maurice. Afterwards, the group immediately goes to a dinner that Wenwu had prepared in expectation of his children's arrival. Wenwu states that it has been quite a long time since he's shared a meal at a table with others. Considering that it has been years, Wenwu asks what his children have been doing since they left the compound. Xiaoling jumps in, saying that she single-handedly founded a lucrative martial arts fighting club with roots in dozens of countries around the world that features fighters both mundane and mystic. Wenwu nods his head and smiles, but never looks at Xiaoling as she recounts her accomplishments. Wenwu then turns to Sean and asks what he has done. Sean looks down, picking at his plate, and says he works as a valet, parking cars for a living with Katie. Xiaoling smirks and laughs, but Wenwu remains stoic, saying that each of their journeys have certainly had their own purpose and meaning, culminating in them sitting right here. Hearing this, Katie chuckles to herself, causing Wenwu to ask if she found something funny. Katie then states that they didn't really have much of a choice in ending up here. Assassins had been trying to kill them from one hemisphere to the next. Wenwu will nod, apologize, and say that he can explain why everything has come to pass. Wenwu takes a deep breath in, gently touches Xiaoling's hand, and looks to Sean. He then says that he believes he has found a way to bring their mother back from the dead. Sean and Xiaoling are now more confused than ever, and Katie isn't far behind them. She looks to Sean and says, "Your mom is dead? I'm sorry, I didn't know." Wenwu states that his wife passed almost 2 decades ago, and that for many of those years, he only thought of revenge for those who were responsible and how to find and discipline the children who had left him. But everything changed when he started to study all he could about the realm of Ta Lo, where his wife came from. Wenwu tells that he learned of a fiercely guarded gate within Ta Lo, and not soon after, he started hearing the voice of his wife calling to him, asking him to find her, to save her, to set her free. Sean snaps his head to his father at hearing the words. He says that he too has heard the voice of his mother calling out to him, but he thought it was just his subconscious running wild, forcing him to imagine things long past. Xiaoling then chimes in too, saying that she didn't want to believe it, but mother had been calling to her as well. Wenwu nods again, smiling and confident, and said that that proves it. His wife's spirit is still out there, most likely trapped behind the mystic gate within Ta Lo. Wenwu lifts up his arms to show the 10 rings of power. He says that in all his research, he found that the only way to open the gate is with the power of all 10 rings. Katie can't help but frown and look to Wenwu. She asks him if he thinks it was worth almost killing his kids just to take back the rings. Wenwu says he understands how it looks, but there was never any real danger, and everything was done for a good reason. The assassins sent after Sean were not there to kill him. Wenwu says he doubts they could even if they tried, seeing as how Sean had a ring of power. The assassins were sent not to kill Sean, but to test his fighting prowess and if he retained his skills. Wenwu says that if Sean were to help him break the gate of Ta Lo, he would need to be strong enough to possibly fight off gate guardians. If Sean proved too weak, Wenwu would have left him uninvolved after the bus incident. Wenwu continues saying that the other reason he sent the assassins was to lure Xiaoling out of hiding. Wenwu tells that while Sean was easy enough to find after leaving the compound, Xiaoling did much better in covering her tracks. Wenwu knew that by sending assassins after Sean, one way or another, that would lead Sean to look for Xiaoling, or the other way around. Granted, Wenwu does admit that he did not think it would work so quickly. Hearing all this, Shang looks to his father and asks why now, after all these years, did he try to find his children. Wenwu says that originally he had been consumed by anger when Shang and Xiaoling left, planning on kidnapping them to force them to stay at the compound. But as time went on, he realized that wouldn't accomplish anything, and they'd most certainly just leave him again. He considered it might be best for them to live their own lives. But the reason that he has brought them back now is actually because of the spirit Katie calls Maurice. Wenwu says that while she was still alive, his wife would sometimes mention spirits of Ta Lo crossing over into our world to visit. When Wenwu started diving into the ancient texts and writings, he found that fact to be true. The spirits would roam the forest just outside the entrance of Ta Lo, which was a magical, ever-changing maze meant to keep away ambitious adventurers. The only way to make it through the maze would be to be guided by a Ta Lo spirit. However, the only people that a spirit would guide are those from Ta Lo. Wenwu states that after years of patiently waiting, he finally managed to capture a spirit and hoped that his children, descended from their native Ta Lo mother, would bond with the spirit and be guided to the realm. However, it looks like even the best plans can run awry, and that the spirit has bonded with Shang's wife instead. Wenwu finishes by saying that this means Katie must be their guide. Katie squirms in her seat a bit, saying that first of all, she is not Shang's wife, and second, she doesn't know if she is cut out to be a spirit guide. Shang speaks up from across the table, saying that he knows this must be an awful lot to take in, what with the assassins and magic rings and alternate Asian dimensions, but he pleads with Katie to help search for Ta Lo, saying that this might be the only chance he has to save his mother and reunite his family. Katie, though still very reluctant, agrees. Wenwu stands and smiles, saying that he could not be happier that everyone is all on board and working together. They will start their journey tomorrow. He goes on to say that dinner might have been delicious, but he has an extra special treat for dessert. Wenwu claps his hands, and moments later, a man in shackles is brought out onto the courtyard of the compound. Wenwu tells Shang, Katie, and Xiaoling to follow. Walking up behind the prisoner, Wenwu says that this man armed the attackers who killed Shang and Xiaoling's mother. The prisoner immediately pleads, saying that he didn't know what those men were going to do with his weapons. The huge ring member with the sword hand slaps the prisoner across the face, telling him to be quiet. Wenwu will say that over the years he has hunted down many of the men responsible for his wife's death, but now it is no longer his turn to take vengeance. Wenwu then takes off one of his rings of power and holds it out towards Shang. The father says that a blood debt is owed. Shang bounces his eyes between the ring and the man in chains, his forehead sweating and his heart beating through his chest. Katie comes to Shang's side and says that he can't really be thinking of killing this man, can he? She says he doesn't have to do this. Wenwu looks to Katie and tells her to keep quiet. This is a family affair. Shang continues to battle with himself, slowly raising his hand to take the ring, but wavering as he hears the prisoner begging for his life. Wenwu encourages Shang to strike him down. He says it's his right to avenge his fallen mother. Shang hesitates again, frozen in place, and just as he moves to grab the ring, he feels Xiaoling push him aside. She snatches the ring from her father and finishes the prisoner with a single blow. Katie is horrified. Wenwu looks to the body on the floor and whispers, "A blood debt has been paid." Xiaoling then offers her father his ring of power back with a smile, but he takes it without looking at her. Wenwu tells Katie that the western wing of the compound has bedrooms ready and Xiaoling can show her the way. Wenwu then calls for Shang to come with him to his study. On the way to the study, Wenwu asks Shang why he hesitated. Shang will say that seeing the man before him brought back memories of the past, memories that made it hard to act. Shang apologizes for failing his father yet again. Hearing this, Wenwu will put his arm around Shang's shoulder and say that there is no need to apologize. The past is strong enough to cripple any man, Wenwu admits that the past even did so to him at times. Sean asks his father how he was able to overcome those feelings, and Wenwu smiles and says explaining that is actually why he wanted Sean to see his study. As those words are said, the two reach the study and walk through its doors. Within, Sean is amazed as he sees gorgeous paintings lining the walls and sitting on easels. Sean asks his father if he made all these, and Wenwu says that he did indeed. He goes on to say that across a lifetime of 1,000 years, the mind becomes plagued and weighed down by its own thoughts. Wenwu found that the best medicine for him was to release those thoughts, so he started painting. As Sean walks around the study, he sees paintings of all different places, peoples, foods, buildings, and battles that his father had seen. But as Sean walks in deeper, an unfinished painting captures his eye. Wenwu walks to Sean and points at the painting he's looking at. It's a painting of Leiko, Sean's mother, holding him as a baby, her hair falling down to cover her face from view. Wenwu says that he's been working on the painting for the last few months and it's just over halfway done. He said that initially he wanted to paint Leiko's face, but he couldn't bring himself to stare at it so often. He misses her far too much for that. Wenwu continues by saying that sometimes he even hears his wife walking around the compound or feels her breathing gently on his cheek. Sean's eyes are locked on the painting. It's been almost 20 years since he last saw his mother, and he'd almost forgotten what she looked like. Sean then turns to his father and says no matter what happens, he will help him bring his mother back. He will not abandon the family again, he promises. Wenwu smiles and says that he's been waiting 10 years to hear that. As Sean moves to leave the study, he notices one other painting. It rests on the ground and is slightly covered by rags, but he can't help but become stuck on it. Wenwu comes over and says that the painting was one he recently finished, a monster from a recurring nightmare that he's been having. Wenwu removes the rag and Sean can fully see the image now. It's a bat-winged creature with a huge mouth and tendrils sprouting from its lower half. Sean tells his father that is the same beast that's been in his nightmares too. Wenwu is surprised to hear that he and his son have both seen this creature, but then ponders aloud that this beast might be the gate guardian that awaits them in Ta Lo. Sean says that honestly, he's never seen something so terrifying in his life, but Wenwu comforts him, saying as long as they're together, nothing can stop them. We then switch over to Katie, who is being led through the compound by Xiaoling. They reach a room, and Xiaoling tells Katie that this can be her spot for the night. Xiaoling also offers Katie a word of advice considering Wenwu. Keep your head down and speak only when spoken to. Xiaoling said she learned that lesson long ago and it made things much easier. As Xiaoling walks away down the hall, Katie calls her name and asks Xiaoling why she did it. Xiaoling turns around and asks Katie to be more specific. Katie asks Xiaoling clearly, "Why did you kill that prisoner?" Xiaoling walks back to Katie and says, because it's what her father wanted. Katie squints her eyes and asks, "Do you do anything your father wants?" Xiaoling chuckles to herself and sighs. She then asks Katie if she has noticed anything since coming to the compound. Like how Sean is given priority in everything, or how Wenwu hasn't looked at Xiaoling even once, not in years in fact, ever since her mother died. Xiaoling says that her father barely cares for or even notices her. All he seems to see is Sean. That's why he is with Wenwu and she is here, giving a house tour to a foreigner like the help. Xiaoling says that she will do anything that gives her a chance to prove that she is equal to Sean. Xiaoling says that if a prisoner had to die for her father to notice her, so be it. She will do whatever it takes to prove herself, especially when Sean can't. Katie is taken aback, but she manages to tell Xiaoling that she seems so self-confident and independent back at the fight club. Now, she seems so careful and obedient. Xiaoling will roll her eyes and walk away, saying as she turns her back that if Katie knew how dangerous her father was, she'd be more careful too. Next, we see Sean in his old childhood room. He touches the wood of the walls and feels the sheets on his bed, reliving far-off memories. Soon after, we see Katie slowly walk up to his room door. Sean invites her in and they sit down together on the bed. Sean says that he can't believe that he's actually back here, reunited with his father, about to go on an adventure to save his mother's soul trapped in another plane of existence. Katie, however, is not so enthused. She says that maybe Wenwu isn't the type of person that Sean should be coming back to. When Sean asks why, Katie is stunned that Sean can't answer that for himself. She reminds Sean that just a few hours ago, assassins were trying to throw them off a building. Sean blows off Katie's concern, saying that his father already explained that the assassins weren't really trying to hurt them. Katie responds by saying that even if that were true, what about all the other people in the fight club? Or all the people on the bus? Or the prisoner in chains? She says that Wenwu doesn't care who he hurts as long as he gets what he wants. Katie says that even if they do get to Ta Lo, does Sean think that the gate guardians are just going to step aside without a fight? Wenwu will kill them all if it means opening the gate. Sean shakes his head, saying that the gate guardians are spirit monsters. Both he and his father have seen them in their dreams. He goes on to say that he knows this is still a lot for Katie to take in all at once, but this is a chance for him to redeem himself. Sean says this is an opportunity for him to become the man his father always wanted, the man that he ran away from, but he needs Katie by his side to do it. Katie nudges Sean with her elbow and says that he's an idiot if he thinks she wouldn't be there to support him. But she also says that at some point, Sean will have to figure out how to be his own man. Katie gets up from the bed and heads to the door, saying that they both need to get some sleep. It's going to be a long day tomorrow. So, here will be the pause to discuss the edited second act. As I said before, this was the portion of the edit with the most changes, but with that being said, we really haven't strayed too far away from the source film, only enhancing the elements that were already there. To tackle the big pieces first, this edit plays up that interfamilial drama and conflict. One of the big weaknesses of the source film was the lack of depth for both Sean and Xiaoling. They really did just seem to float from one ambush to the next, never really engaging in any deep character journey. In this second act edit though, I wanted to establish a complex character triangle that set clear goals and intentions for the characters. Instead of being opposed and resentful to his father, Sean is deeply guilty about his abandonment and is eager to fix his relationship and live up to his father's expectations. Instead of Xiaoling being a simple support, she is now the disregarded second child, feverishly working to prove her worth to her father. By putting Sean and Xiaoling on the same side as Wenwu, their relationship with him becomes the conflict. Both of these adults have basically regressed themselves back into children by making their identities completely dependent on their father's approval. Sean now feels obligated to go on this wild adventure without even questioning it because he sees this as his sole opportunity to rectify his past actions and in turn extinguish the painful shame that has plagued him for the last decade. Xiaoling now feels obligated to go on this wild adventure because it will allow her the opportunity to be seen by her father and be recognized for who she is. Sean and Xiaoling in this edit are foils of each other. Sean is the favored heir that ran away from the expectations that were thrust upon him, and Xiaoling is the ignored second child trying to prove she is worthy of expectations. While Sean did everything he could to distance himself from his father and family, Xiaoling spent years becoming a mini version of her father in the hope of earning his affection. There is no single antagonist anymore, but a cast of characters that are flawed and conflicted in their own way. A large reason that I went with this focus as an editor is because I believe it reflects how many children feel about their relationships with their parents. Now, I cannot speak for the Asian community, but I do come from a minority ethnic background, and over the years, I've met plenty of people whose lives were dominated by their parents' expectations of them. Their identities were more reflections of who their parents wanted them to be, from when and who they dated, what they studied, what job they worked, and other very personal life choices. Conflict in fiction is given power by the struggles that we face in real life, so basing Sean and Xiaoling's conflict on their relationship with their father seemed apt for what real people might go through. But in doing this, it was also important to show the full nature of Wenwu. If I made him completely likable and benevolent, there really wouldn't be any tension. And this is why Katie and the prisoner are so important. Wenwu's treatment of the prisoner demonstrates that he very much still is a killer, that he's morally dubious at times, and that he sees nothing wrong with his children being killers as well. And Katie acts as the voice of reason, able to look at the situation with clear eyes in ways that Sean and Xiaoling can't. Katie sees that what Wenwu is doing isn't normal, and that Sean's devotion to him may be ill-placed. Katie is the narrative tool to keep the audience grounded in right versus wrong, even with the characters in the fiction struggling with it. But even aside from that, there were a ton of little things in this edited second act that changed. The Mandarin character was taken out and streamlined so that Katie was the one who bonded with Maurice, though this was more for concision's sake than necessity. The assassins coming after Sean was given a new reason that made it a bit less convenient and contrived. And probably biggest of all, we got some much needed foreshadowing for the soul suckers in the climax. Those unexplained nightmares that Sean talked about in the edited first act come into play now. Sean and Wenwu discuss these flying creatures and figure that they must be the gate guardians of Ta Lo, which acts as a nice red herring. All in all though, we still didn't have to change a ton to achieve these improved outcomes. It just took an understanding of what strengths and weaknesses were in the narrative and how they might be organically addressed. Now, we can move straight into the third and final act. The third act will begin with our group arriving to and entering the forest maze to start the journey. Katie, with Maurice in her lap, will guide the Ten Rings convoy through, closely following the source film's high-octane driving sequence. After a close call, the group will reach the entrance to Ta Lo, prompting Wenwu to tell his children that this is where he met their mother. Katie says that the actual entrance is behind a nearby waterfall. Sean and Xiaoling enter first, then Katie carrying Maurice, but when Wenwu and the ring members try to enter, they cannot pass beyond the water. Wenwu surmises that Sean and Xiaoling must be able to pass through because they are descended from their native mother. When Katie asks why she can enter, Wenwu says that Maurice must have chosen her as a guest. Wenwu tells the group to go on ahead and find the gate, but if they see any natives of Ta Lo, do not tell them why they have come. They might summon the gate guardians. Sean asks how his father will get in, and Wenwu says that his son should not worry about him. The 10 rings are all that he needs. Wenwu punches the waterfall, and the magic that covers it shakes and weakens. He says that he will get through eventually, then he will meet with the group and open the gate together. Sean, Katie, and Xiaoling travel by foot into Ta Lo, marveling at the landscape and the wild spirits that populate it. After a while of walking, just before sundown, the group comes across a village set in front of a lake. Across the lake is a mountain, and set inside the mountain is a huge door. They realize that must be the gate they are looking for. As the group approaches the village, Xiaoling reminds Sean and Katie to keep their mission a secret. She doesn't want the villagers to summon the flying, tentacled gate guardians. Sean is surprised and asks Xiaoling how she knew that is what the gate guardians looked like. Xiaoling responds by saying that she's always seen them in her dreams right before hearing her mother's voice. Once she heard Wenwu talk about gate guardians, she figured those monsters must be the ones protecting the gate. The group continues to walk toward the village, but as they do, they are met by an old man, the village elder, and 2 guards with glowing red staffs. The elder demands to know what these travelers are doing in Ta Lo. Sean tells the man that he and his sister are the children of Leiko, and a spirit has chosen their friend Katie to be their guide so they can see the homeland of their mother. The old man's demeanor immediately changes upon hearing Leiko's name, and he apologizes for being so confrontational. He tells the group to come into the village. There's someone special for them to meet. The old man guides them to Zhang Nan, their aunt, the sister of Leiko. Aunt Zhang wraps them up in a hug, saying that she's always wondered what became of her sister's children. She said she knew Leiko left to marry Wenwu, but never saw her again after, only hearing of her death because of the spirits that would return to Ta Lo. Aunt Zhang asks how Wenwu is doing after all this time. Shan and Xiaoling smile and say that he's doing well. Aunt Zhang then shows the group around the village, but Shan and Leiko become fixated on one thing in particular. They see a group of villagers practicing martial arts stances and forms, and it reminds them exactly how their mother used to move. Aunt Zhang tells that is the ancient fighting style of Ta Lo, and their mother Leiko was the best in the whole village. With a smile, Aunt Zhang asks Shan and Xiaoling if they would like to learn it. Both the siblings look to each other, then nod in agreement. Aunt Zhang brings the siblings to a dirt arena while Katie watches on. Aunt Zhang says that first, she must see the siblings' skill in fighting. She tells them that their test will be for them to knock her off her feet. Shan notes that it's 2 against 1, it doesn't seem fair, but Aunt Zhang smiles and says he should wait to say that until after he passes the test. Shan and Xiaoling shrug, then move to take down their aunt. They punch, kick, jab, thrust, swipe, and leap, but just like the fight before, they get in each other's way and can't land a good blow. In fact, Aunt Zhang puts them both on their backs before they even land a hit. Aunt Zhang furrows her brow and comments that their fighting style is full of rage and pain, saying that they must have learned it from their father. She goes on to say that fighting is not all about breaking bones and brute force. The style of Ta Lo is about understanding who you share the battlefield with and how you make a connection with them. Only by truly learning of your foe can you defeat them. Aunt Zhang says that Shan fights like a man who is always second-guessing himself, who is never sure of his actions, and therefore cannot strike with conviction and purpose. Aunt Zhang says Xiaoling fights like someone who's only focused on showcasing their own strength, not focusing on anyone else on the battlefield, making her inflexible, rigid, and unadaptive. Aunt Zhang says that she wants the siblings to fight her again, but instead of fighting like their father, fight like their mother. To not look inward, but to focus on those around them. To let go of the painful past that informs their fighting style, and only focus on the present, and how to more deeply know those who stand against them, and who stand beside them. Both Shan and Xiaoling close their eyes, take a deep breath, and remember their mother. How she talked, how she laughed, how she moved. When the siblings open their eyes again, they restart their sparring with Aunt Zhang. This time though, they are much more in sync, fighting in tandem rather than getting in each other's way. Eventually, they succeed in sweeping Aunt Zhang off her feet, causing Shan and Xiaoling to high-five, surprising even themselves a bit with the action. Aunt Zhang stands back up and says that was much better. She will guide them again in more practice tomorrow, but the sun is almost down now, and there's food to be eaten. We next see Shan, Katie, and Xiaoling smiling and laughing while sitting on the shore of the lake, eating out of bowls. Shan and Xiaoling are recounting to Katie the shenanigans they used to get into while their mother was still alive, laughing about how silly they were as children. Xiaoling says that it's almost weird how goofy their father was back then. Looking down at her bowl, Katie remarks that, speaking of their father, what are they going to do when Wenwu sees all these villagers in front of the gate? If they see he has broken into Ta Lo without a spirit guide, they're not going to welcome him. Shan says that there is nothing to worry about. As soon as Wenwu tells the villagers that he is here to free the souls trapped behind the gate, they'll let him pass. Who wouldn't want to bring the dead back to life? Katie says that's a very optimistic way of thinking about things, bordering on naive. Xiaoling says that Katie will have to forgive her brother. He sees what Wenwu tells him to see, and hears what Wenwu tells him to hear, though he doesn't have much of a choice, especially after he betrayed the family all those years ago. Katie rolls her eyes and says that complete and total servitude is a bit overkill as a consequence for stealing one ring of power. Xiaoling chuckles and looks to Shan. She asks him if that's all he's told Katie about what happened. Sean looks down to his feet, worry growing on his face. Katie becomes curious, asking if there is something more to what is going on here. Xialing tells Sean to tell Katie the whole truth, seeing as how she's wrapped up in all this now. Sean takes a deep breath and tells Katie that he lied before, or at least he didn't tell her everything. He did betray his father, but it wasn't by stealing the ring. Sean then tells Katie the same story from the source film, where his mother was murdered by men looking for revenge on Wenwu. Sean also reveals that his father came to him as a child and asked for his help in exacting revenge on those that killed his mother. Sean tells Katie that he accepted his father's request and trained from the time he was 7 in order to kill those responsible, to collect a blood debt, just like he promised. After a decade of training, Sean's final task was to kill the leader of his mother's killers. Sean did not steal the ring. His father had given it to him for the final mission, a sign of how much he trusted him. But when Sean broke into the man's home and was standing over him, ready to fulfill the promise he made to his father and avenge his mother, he couldn't bring himself to kill. No matter what he did, he couldn't take the man's life, so he let him go. Sean says that he could not possibly have gone back home to face his father after breaking his promise, after turning his back on justice for his mother, so he fled into hiding. Sean tells Katie that he's never been more ashamed of anything in his life. He abandoned his family, both living and dead. Xialing frowns and says that just for a moment, she almost forgot how much of a coward and a traitor Sean was, but thanks him for reminding her. Xialing says that Sean was always too weak to do what needed to be done, too weak to be the heir to the 10 rings. That's why she had to track down the man and do what Sean couldn't. Sean looks to his sister confused and asks, what is she talking about? Xialing says she could never turn her back on her mother like he did. Xialing says she didn't steal a ring and run away from the compound to start a new Fey life like he did. She stole the ring from her father so that she could kill the man that Sean couldn't. And she did. Sean looks to Xialing and said that he had no idea about this, prompting Xialing to say that it makes sense that he didn't know. He only thinks about himself, like when he left her all alone to live with their revenge-obsessed father who hated her, that wouldn't even look at her. Xialing says that she avenged her mother the way Sean couldn't, and at that moment, she realized that she should be the favored child and heir, not him. That is why she left the compound, to prove to her father that she could fulfill the expectations that Sean was too spineless to live up to. Xialing then drops her bowl, says she's lost her appetite, and walks away in a huff. Sean curls himself up as he sits, gripping his knees, shaking as he is overcome with emotions. He starts saying that he can never atone for what he did in the past, never make up for leaving his family. Katie comes to Sean's side and wraps him up in a hug. She says that running away from a father that wants you to kill isn't wrong. Choosing not to take life isn't wrong. Sean says that he promised his father he would help, though. He was all his father had, his closest ally, his heir, and he couldn't fulfill his promise to him, not even if it meant avenging his mother. Sean says that men came to his home and killed his mother in front of him, but he couldn't kill them in return, which means that something must be wrong with him. Katie holds Sean close and tells him that it was completely unfair for Wenwu to ask a 7-year-old child to take vengeance for their dead mother. Katie says that Wenwu put Sean in an impossible position, guilting him into subordination. He had just lost one parent. How could he reject the other? Katie will say that no matter what Sean had done, kill or not kill, it wouldn't have brought his mother back. Sean steadies himself slowly and says that back then, his father was in so much pain that the only thing that would make it better was revenge. It's what his father so desperately wanted, so what kind of son would he be to turn him down? At those words, Katie says that's the exact problem. It's what Wenwu wanted. Katie says that Sean needs to start living his own life and start making decisions that are best for him. She says that she will always be by his side, but he has to start living life for himself. She helps Sean wipe away his tears, gives him a smile, and they stand up and get ready to turn in for the night. We then move to Xiaoling, walking furiously through the village. She's muttering under her breath, stomping her feet, soaked up in rage. But as she turns a corner, she sees a building, and it stops Xiaoling in her tracks. All the anger that she had just a moment ago vanishes, and she stares on, completely captured by what she sees. Next, we move to Sean getting ready for bed in his room, but he hears a knock on his door. When he opens it, it's Xiaoling outside. Before he can start apologizing, Xiaoling cuts him off and says that there's something that she wants to show him. The siblings walk through the village together, and as they reach the destination, Sean stops and stares just as Xiaoling did. Xiaoling says that she thought it was best for both of them to be here. Sean and Xiaoling stand in front of a shrine for all the past residents of the village. There are dozens of paintings depicting those young, old, and middling. But in the center of the shrine, with the largest painting of them all, is Leiko, their mother, with an epithet under her reading, the Forest Guardian. Sean says it's the first time that he's seen his mother's face in almost 20 years, and Xiaoling agrees. The siblings come close to the shrine, smelling the burning incense and watching the smoke gently waft through the air. Xiaoling then turns to Sean and says that she's sorry about how she acted. She says that sometimes, when she closes her eyes, she can still see the face of the man she killed all those years ago, screaming in his last moments. She says that she's never told anyone about it until tonight, and more emotions bubbled up than she thought would. But Xiaoling finishes by saying that when she saw the portrait of her mother, she knew she wouldn't want them to be fighting like this. Sean looks Xiaoling in her eyes and says that all he's thought about over the last 10 years is how he could apologize to her and make things right. Sean says that Xiaoling has every right to be mad at him. He abandoned her. Xiaoling says that leaving her was definitely wrong, but now they have to work together. She looks out across the lake water, straight to the huge gate set inside the mountain. Xiaoling says that very soon, their mother is going to be back, and they have to make sure she likes what she sees. Sean smiles and says that he can't wait to see his mom again, though it might be a bit hard to explain why neither of them are married after 20 years. Xiaoling chuckles and says that marriage might not be for her, but Sean always has Katie if things get too hard. Sean rolls his eyes and says that for the last time, he and Katie are just friends. Xiaoling laughs harder now and says she was just kidding, but she also says that Sean is lucky to have a friend like Katie. She's a good person who seems to really care. Next comes the following morning, and we see Sean and Xiaoling practicing with Aunt Zhang again. The siblings are moving even better than the previous day, and are able to overwhelm their aunt in mere moments. Aunt Zhang says that they have picked up their mother's fighting style incredibly fast, and that she would be proud. Sean looks around and sees that many of the other villagers are practicing fighting as well. Others spar with staffs and shields, even archers line up to shoot at targets. Sean asks his aunt why such a peaceful village needs to train so hard and so frequently. Aunt Zhang says that the villagers are preparing for a day they hope will never come again, a day when warriors will be lured to the gate across the lake. Hearing this, Xiaoling asks what her aunt means by lured to the gate. Aunt Zhang says that instead of telling her, it'll be easier to show her. She walks the siblings into the village and guides them to the stone mural from the source film, telling them about the Great Protector and the war against the Soul Suckers. Sean will freeze in place as he sees the stone carvings of the Soul Suckers. He will tell his aunt that those monsters have appeared in his nightmares for the past few years. Aunt Zhang will say that Soul Suckers are powerful spirits that lure ambitious warriors to the gate through temptation and deception. They whisper in the minds of the vulnerable, making them believe that the gate holds something they desire greatly, but it's simply a trap to release them once again. After saying this, Aunt Zhang will look to Xia Ling and ask if she has seen the soul suckers in her dreams too. Xia Ling will hesitate, but ultimately admit that she has. Aunt Zhang grows even more worried. She then asks if their father has had the same dreams. The siblings pause and look at each other, but that's all the confirmation Aunt Zhang needs. She says that the soul suckers seek out those who have the power to free them. They know the 10 rings are strong enough to destroy the gate and release them. Aunt Zhang asks if Shan and Xia Ling have possession of the rings while having their nightmares. Shan says that he had one, and Xia Ling admits that she had one as well. Aunt Zhang says that must mean that their father had the other 8. His nightmares and temptations must have been magnitudes worse than whatever the siblings were experiencing. She was always worried that Wenwu would become a target of the soul suckers because of the 10 rings, and it looks like her fears have finally been realized. Aunt Zhang asks Shan and Xia Ling to be completely honest with her. What are their intentions for coming to Ta Lo? Shan and Xia Ling admit that they came to Ta Lo to find the gate so that their father may use the 10 rings to break it open and free their mother's trapped soul. He's on his way as they speak. Aunt Zhang shakes her head and says that their mother is dead and gone. The only thing behind that gate is the destruction of Ta Lo. Aunt Zhang turns on her heels and says she must ready the village for combat. Shan grabs a hold of his aunt as she walks away, telling her that fighting won't be necessary. As long as they explain to Wenwu that the soul suckers are actually behind the gate, his father will understand. Before his aunt can respond though, a horn in the village blows. Aunt Zhang hears it and says that it's already too late. Aunt Zhang, Shan, and Xia Ling rush to the front of the village to find Wenwu and his army of men. The villagers have already started to gather their weapons and shields in defense. When Wenwu sees his children, he smiles, raises his arms, and calls out to them. Shan and Xia Ling look to each other, then walk to their father. Wenwu apologizes for taking so long, but says that he is ready to set his wife free. However, he looks to Shan and sees that he's upset. Wenwu asks his son what is wrong. Shan struggles for a moment, thinking about what he has to say, but decides that he cannot remain silent. Shan says that the gate guardians aren't monsters, they're the people of his mother's village. And he goes on to say that the monsters are trapped behind the gate, not his mother's soul. They lured them here, hoping to be set free. Xia Ling steps in and says that it's true, they've been manipulated from the start. Confusion takes over Wenwu's face as his eyes lock onto the gate across from the lake. He asks Shan where he learned all this from, and Shan responds that his aunt who lives in the village told them. Hearing this, Wenwu shakes his head and asks his children, don't they think it's a bit strange that they would conveniently meet their aunt for the first time just outside the gate, and she would tell them not to open it? Wenwu says that this is all just a trick by the gate guardians to keep them from freeing their mother now that they've gotten so close. Wenwu says that his children no longer need to worry. He will handle everything from here. Wenwu walks a few steps forward and shouts to the villagers. He says that if they leave the village behind and come to his side, none of them will be harmed. But if they attempt to keep him from opening the gate, he will show them no mercy. The village elder, with fighters and warriors behind him, says that they have defended this gate for generations and will not abandon it now. Shan and Xia Ling walk to their father, begging him not to attack. He looks to the village and all its people, the women, the children, the old and fragile, and his resolve softens. But then he hears a woman call out to him from across the lake. It's the voice of his wife, pleading for Wenwu to set her free. Wenwu says that he's come too far now to give up, and orders for his men to attack. The 10 Rings assassins and the villagers clash, descending into battle. Shan and Xia Ling stand by their father, looking on to the chaos. The siblings remain silent, acquiescing to their father's wishes. However, A scream rips through the air that catches Sean's ear. It's Katie being attacked by the masked ring member. Sean tells his father that he has to call off the attack, but Wenwu says that if Katie were truly on their side, she'd be standing with them. She has chosen her place. Sean looks on in horror as Katie does her best to defend herself, but there is really nothing she can do. Katie falls to the ground, the masked man coming closer to her step by step. Finally, Xiaoling shouts that if Sean won't do something, she will. Xiaoling leaves her father's side and runs into the battle, knocking the masked ring member away from Katie. The two engage in one-on-one combat amidst the clamor of the conflict. Wenwu frowns as he sees Xiaoling run away. He tells Sean that his sister is weak and has disappointed him. Hearing those words from his father, Sean balls his fists and says that Xiaoling isn't weak at all, and neither is he. Sean leaves his father's side too, coming to fight along Xiaoling. It's a rematch between them and the masked ring member, except this time, the siblings fight unified. They work together and take down the masked ring member in plain view of their father. Upon seeing both his children leave him again, Wenwu sinks into anger and launches himself into battle, using the full power of the 10 rings. The fight will then closely follow the source film, with Wenwu eventually flinging himself across the lake to the gate. Just like in the source film, Wenwu will smash the gate with the power of the 10 rings, weakening it so that small soul suckers can make their way through. Initially, at the sight of them, Wenwu will pause, but he will again hear the voice of his wife pleading for his help, and begin smashing the gate again. Again, following the source film, the Great Protector will awaken from the lake, eat some of the soul suckers, and act as a ferry to the gate. However, instead of taking just Sean like in the source film, the dragon will transport both Sean and Xiaoling. The siblings will fight their father, but they will be no match for him as he has the 10 rings. Wenwu is so skilled, in fact, that he can fight Sean and Xiaoling and still find moments to hit the gate, releasing more soul suckers. Sean and Xiaoling pick themselves up off the ground, realizing that whatever they're doing isn't working. Sean looks to his sister and says they can't fight like how they used to. He says that they have to completely trust in each other and have each other's backs. Xiaoling smiles and nods, and then the two head back into battle with their father. However, now they have much more success. The siblings are able to move in tandem, weave around each other, and dodge Wenwu's strikes. They overwhelm their father with coordinated assaults, finally fighting as one. Working together, Sean manages to take a ring of power from his father's right arm, and Xiaoling snatches a ring from their father's left arm. The siblings don their rings and re-engage their father, stronger than ever. Wenwu can't find a time to counterattack. As soon as Xiaoling ends her strike, Sean comes in with a swing of his own. The rings fly through the air, clanging into each other, kicking up dust and rocks as they tear up the landscape. As the fight continues, Sean and Xiaoling gain more and more of an advantage. The siblings manage to take yet another ring, each from their father, leaving Wenwu with only 6. Wenwu is constantly on his heels, overwhelmed by the synchronized flurry that his children are unleashing. But again, Wenwu hears the voice of his wife from inside the gate, and he is consumed by rage. He lunges at Sean, smacking him across the face and taking back his rings. Then locks with Xiaoling, bringing her to the ground, and steals his rings back from her as well. With all 10 of the rings back on his arms, Wenwu gives the strongest smash yet to the gate. The ground shakes, not just on the mountain, but across the lake as well. The soul suckers in the air stop their swarming, flapping in place, looking back to the gate. The whole world goes silent. Only one sound remains. It's the voice of Leiko, shouting, "Free me, free me." Moments after, the gate bursts open, but it is not Leiko that appears, but a huge soul sucker, just as large as the Great Protector of the lake. All of Wenwu's hope turns into terror as he sees the monster emerge, realizing just how wrong he was. He becomes even more terrified when the huge soul sucker turns its sights on Sean and Xiaoling, diving for them. Wenwu uses the power of the Ten Rings to slam into the monster, but before he can land, the Soul Sucker snatches him up and ascends into the sky. The monster lifts Wenwu up before its mouth and then inhales to rip the man's soul from his body. Shan and Xialing look on from below, powerless to help. Wenwu struggles to free himself, but he grows weaker and weaker by the moment as his soul is siphoned away. Just as he feels the last dregs of life about to escape his body, the Great Protector slams into the Soul Sucker, forcing it to drop Wenwu. Shan runs to catch his father as he falls and lunges through the air just in time. Shan rests his father down on the ground, but it looks like it's too late for him to do anything. Wenwu reaches up his hand and touches his son on his face. He says that it looks like Shan was right after all. Wenwu apologizes for his obsession and short-sightedness. Shan urges his father to keep quiet and preserve his strength, but Wenwu shakes his head. He says that Leiko always told him that he should not let the past take control of his present. Wenwu says that after his wife died, he thought it was impossible to move on from the past, but now he realizes that dwelling on things from long ago only keeps one from living their life in the here and now. Wenwu apologizes to Shan for turning his childhood into one of revenge and pain. He should have never done that. Wenwu lets out a cough, clearly on death's door, then asks Shan where his sister is. Shan points to Xialing, standing off far to the side. Wenwu asks why she is so far away. Xialing says that she did not want to interrupt her father's final moments with his son and heir. She says she understands. She's nothing but an afterthought that he never bothered to look at. Hearing this, Wenwu calls Xialing close and she obeys. For the first time in years, Wenwu looks at Xialing, locking eyes with her. He says that earlier he called her weak, but Wenwu admits that he is the weak one. The reason he hadn't looked at Xialing for so long was because she reminded him too much of her mother, and he couldn't handle it. Wenwu says that this is why he never taught Xialing to fight. He couldn't stand to see her enduring those painful trainings. Wenwu holds Xialing's hand tight and says that he loves Xialing just as much as Shan. With his final remaining breaths, Wenwu says that his children must now fix the sins of their father, but he trusts them to do it. Both of them. Wenwu then sends 5 rings of power onto Shan's arm and 5 rings of power onto Xialing's arms. Afterwards, Wenwu looks up to the sky and says he just realized something. Dying means that he will get to be with his wife again after all. He passes at that moment, with a smile on his face. Standing up from their father, Shan and Xialing, as equals, use the power of the rings to have an epic, Marvel-style climactic battle with the huge Soul Sucker. They fight valiantly, back and forth, alongside the Great Protector, but it seems that the siblings still do not have enough power to prevail. The huge Soul Sucker has managed to take the dragon within its grasp, and is moments away from killing it. Xialing says that to take the Soul Sucker down, it will require all 10 rings. With a deep breath in, she removes her 5 rings and sends them to Shan, the ultimate sign of her respect. Shan then musters all of his strength along with the power of the 10 rings to defeat the huge Soul Sucker and save the whole freaking world. After the battle, Shan tries to give the 5 rings back to Xialing. He says that he wants them to be equals. However, Xialing says that Shan should keep all 10 rings. She smirks and remarks that it's the only way he's ever going to be equal to her. And from there, everything ends the same as the source film. So, now we can pause to break down this edited 3rd act. Hopefully it's becoming clear that after every change that we made, every alteration and deviation from the source material, we still end up with the same conclusion, though more powerful and more focused. This 3rd act was all about bringing all those little planted seeds beforehand to fruition. Like I said from the beginning, from an editing perspective, I wanted everything in this narrative to be centered around the interpersonal family conflict. Shan, Xialing, and Wenwu are the focal points of this story, so the third act needed to maximize their eventual confrontation and transformation. Separating Shan and Xialing from Wenwu was really important because it gave them a chance as characters to progress independently from him. That sibling discord that was a huge part of the second act was able to be explored in more depth in Act 3. Aunt Zhang teaching the fighting style of their mother was really the catalyst to move them in the right direction, allowing for the big revelation of just what both these siblings were truly dealing with. Shan was ashamed because he could not go through with killing a man and abandoned his family, while Xialing always felt that she had to prove her equality in reference to Shan, so she killed a man as a teenager to prove that she could do what Shan could not. By having the characters fully reveal who they are, and in turn having them become their most vulnerable, that is where the true opportunity to build them back up closer to one another presents itself. Once again, I used the memory of Leiko, their mother, to bring the siblings together and start to move past their differences. After that, everything was based in using previously established events to give power to the finale. Shan and Xialing learned that their mother is not behind the gate, and the previously foreshadowed monsters are actually manipulating them. They also learned that the rings that they had used were the keys for the monsters to manipulate them, which is another reason why I included the rings in the first act at all. When Wenwu arrives, Shan and Xialing are confronted with the crossroads of their character: continue living the lives that their father wants, or stand against him for what they know is right. The catalyst for this decision is seeing Katie in harm's way, and both the siblings choose to fight against Wenwu. This all culminates with the siblings fighting Wenwu in front of the gate. In the source film, it was just Shan, but again, this new edit is focused on using the entire family for the conflict. Using the fighting style of their mother, and by completely trusting in each other, Shan and Xialing are able to get the upper hand on Wenwu. This is the culmination of the journey that started in the first act. The siblings initially were in discord, unable to defeat even the masked ring member back at the fight club. Now, they fight together in harmony, having overcome their personal differences and past pains in order to help each other succeed. Of course, Wenwu still ends up breaking the huge soul sucker out of the gate, but instead of dying, the edit allows him a moment to reflect on his life and mistakes. This allows him to make the big revelation towards Xialing that he always loved her, but didn't look at her because of his own weakness. This is foreshadowed in the second act in the study when Shan sees the painting of his mother, but with her face blocked. Wenwu then bequeaths his 10 rings to both children, showing that they have become equal. This is the family's full circle moment where all their journeys have come to their ultimate point. Wenwu realizes he should have let the past go, Shan realizes that he should have always been living his own life, and Xialing realizes that she never needed to prove herself because her father always loved her. Shan and Xialing fight the giant soul sucker as equals, but to really cap off Xialing's character journey, she gives Shan all 10 rings so that he can win. I thought this decision fit pretty well because 1, Shan is the titular character, so it makes sense that he would have the finishing blow even in the edit, and 2, it shows how Xialing has truly moved past her obsession with living her life comparing herself to Shan. She doesn't need that approval anymore. She's completely her own person. Now, there are probably a dozen tiny aspects and details that I could probably go over, but the main point of this video was again showing how little changes in editing can have big impacts on the narrative. This is not to say that everything was perfect. You might have hated my decisions, but overall, I strove to keep the fiction as true to itself as possible. If you guys have any questions about the editing process or comments that you want me to see, leave them down below. Anyway, thank you all for watching all the way to the end. If you like what you heard, like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to be a real homie, support on Patreon, check out my other channel, or check out my books on my website. As always, it was a pleasure, and I will talk to you all again soon.